much does the ending of your novel actually matter? I set out to write this video about how to write an ending, and in the process, I got to thinking about endings and how they might matter less than you might first think. Yes, you can write a bad ending, an ending that the reader doesn't like. You can lean into a deus ex machina solution to your conflict. You can have a hitherto unknown character appear out of nowhere to save the day. You can ship a couple characters together in a way that people don't like. There are no shortage of ways to craft a bad ending. But this doesn't escape the truth that a lot of great novels have not great endings, or at least endings that aren't that memorable. A lot of great, well-known novels have endings that just kind of fizzle out. Catcher in the Rye just sort of ends. 1984 ends, but doesn't really change anything. The characters in Of Mice and Men don't really get an ending. Well, except for Lenny. Stephen King, one of the best-selling authors of this century and also last century, I believe, as well, is notorious for having a lot of meh sort of endings, even to his most popular books. I think a strong argument could be made that so long as an ending isn't bad enough to retroactively ruin the rest of the novel, then it's probably fine, and that more of your effort should go into creating an engaging beginning and middle of your novel, because no matter how good your ending is, it probably won't save you from a bad opening. If people put down a novel before they've reached the ending, it doesn't matter how good the ending is. All of that being said, there are some things that you should consider when writing the ending of your novel, and it's definitely not something that you can ignore. A lot of good writers have lackluster endings and get away with it, but if you try to do that, it may not end well. A good ending begins at the beginning. The groundwork for how you want your novel to end needs to start at the start. It could be said that writing a good beginning is the most important step to writing a good ending, and that if you have a good enough opening, writing the ending actually becomes easier. In fact, a lot of the good endings you'll see out there are only good because of the groundwork that was laid earlier on in the story. Some people will advise that you start with the ending of your novel in mind and work backwards. I don't know that that's universally true, but I do think having some sort of idea for what kind of ending you want is definitely something that you should have when you set out to write your novel. It sucks to get 75% of the way through writing a novel that you really like, only to realize at the end that you have absolutely no idea how to pull this thing together. When endings go bad, it's usually because of something that was completely unexpected, like stopping a video mid-sentence to remind people to subscribe if they haven't subscribed already. If at the end of your novel you introduce new powers or new capabilities of a technology, or if you have characters behave against their characterization that you've developed for the entire novel and have them start wanting other things that they didn't want before just so you can get to an ending, if you have weird off-the-wall solutions that just kind of come out of nowhere, then you're going to have trouble in your ending. The best place to learn how to set up an ending early is from mysteries. A major part of mysteries is laying out clues for the reader to pick up on, which sort of hint at what the ending is going to be. Stuff that may not seem relevant until we get to the end. In fact, of all the genres out there, I would say mystery is the genre that relies on a good ending the most. And the cardinal sin of a mystery writer is creating an ending that could not have been deduced from the information provided through the beginning and middle of the story. One way that I think you can enhance this, though, is to have a bit of a bittersweet ending. I think endings that are either completely tragic, where nothing works out for the characters, or bittersweet endings where things sort of work out, but some stuff doesn't work out, those are the best kinds. If every villain is defeated in the end, and every character gets what they want, and every character ends up in a relationship, and everyone is happy about how everything went, that often doesn't really lead to a great ending. In that case, the ending might be a little bit too predictable. Taking a positive ending and making some of the characters not get what they want, having somebody but not everybody die, having two characters decide to just be friends instead of pursuing a relationship, Mixing in some of those bittersweet elements can really work to enhance an ending. You'll see this especially with a lot of big cast series where you have a lot of characters whose arcs are resolving at the end of the book or end of the series. The Wheel of Time kind of does this where things work out for some characters and they don't work out for other characters, or they work out in an unexpected way for certain characters. Jane Eyre kind of does this where it ends with the characters largely getting what they want and the plot kind of resolving in a predictable way. But there's also some stuff that doesn't go well and some unexpected stuff thrown in at the end to add a little bit of variety. Now, a completely positive ending where everybody gets what they want probably doesn't work most of the time, but a completely negative ending might work. If the story is a tragedy, then everything can go bad, and those sorts of endings work better than a purely positive ending. But also remember, thinking back to point one, if your story is going to be a tragedy and end in a bad way, then the reader should probably know that it's a tragedy before we get to the ending. The kind of note that you want to end on should guide the writing of the rest of the novel. A light, happy ending should be reflected in the tone of the entire work. A darker ending should generally be preceded by a darker tone. Resolution is also a critical thing to consider with an ending. It should be a minimum of 720p, though 1080p is also quite common. But remember, most printing presses can't handle 4K, so keep that in mind. Resolution is different from just ending a story. Resolution comes down to answering questions and resolving plot threads at the end of the story. Satisfying the reader by resolving the story is not always something you want to do. In fact, many great endings have loose threads that are just left to dangle. In extreme cases, you have a cliffhanger ending where you just... This can obviously backfire, and I don't know of any novel that ends with a complete cliffhanger where there's absolutely no resolution, though it's probably been done before. You have to be really careful with this because just leaving something hanging without answering a question that the reader has or letting them know how something turns out, that can lead to a really bad ending, and I think that is the kind of thing that can retroactively ruin an otherwise good novel. Usually, I think this is done where a more concrete conflict comes to an end, but if there's a more abstract sort of existential conflict that exists in the story, that might not necessarily come to a resolution. Anyway, speaking of endings, this is the ending of this video. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this video and found the advice in it useful. Please remember to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.